another service provider outside of Job Center, which I proposed that Job Center would be the service provider. Because if we became the service provider, my guarantee was that, in opposed to other Job Corps centers where 70 to 80% of the students who occupy the center don't live in the city. They live out of the state in some cases. If I was going to run the center, I was going to make sure that 80% was from the inner city, and that the 20%, of course, would be distributed equally amongst out county and out of the state. Well, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it, because in my mind, how do you justify bringing kids from outside of a community that's already filled with its own set of problems? How do you tell a kid who's right across the street from a Job Corps center, who may be homeless, who don't even have a place to stay, that they can enjoy some of the amenities that's inside of that particular center because someone else from Ohio, from New York, from Kansas, wherever they may be, is there? So there's a lot of opportunities to help a lot of youth here. Right. More importantly, outside of that, is that it would have revived a lot of businesses who would have been closing. So that wasn't just a youth workforce development strategy. It was a economic development strategy that could have created some jobs and revived some businesses.
Now, you were talking about education. The Flint schools are suffering right now. The school board is facing some very difficult decisions during that time. If you're elected, how will your administration collaborate with them or help them succeed?
Well, of all of the 6 candidates, I'm the only one who's actually moved well over $50 million through the school system. While I was the president and CEO of the Workforce Development Corporation, which was Job Central, now called Career Alliance, I had contracts with Flint schools, ISD, the ISD also in Shiawassee County, Mott Community College. Mostly every education institution I collaborated with and run money through, whether that was basic remediation courses, whether that was college courses, whether that was skilled trade courses. So I'm the only one of all of them who have experience in working with schools.
I see. Well, we are facing a potential $14 million deficit here in the city, maybe leading up to $30 million with the current lawsuits. If your administration, or if you are elected, how will your administration, or what will you decline to cut? What will you say on this show that I will not cut specifically, because I think that is too important? Because you're obviously going to have to make some decisions if you're elected with this lingering deficit. What will you not be willing to cut?
Let me answer it this way. When most people think about that we're in a deficit situation, they really think that the city is broke, or in some cases what they do in this rational way of thinking is assuming we don't have enough money to run the city. Let me answer your question from a different corner. Some can ask the question, are we faced with a $14 million deficit? And they can place a lot of emphasis on that. I don't. The reason why I don't is because, number one, I'm an accountant. My degrees is in accounting. Number one, I've worked as a chief financial officer. I've also worked as a chief operating officer. I've also worked as a chief executive officer who've had accountants and chief operating officers and chief executive officers to report to me. I've also been responsible for my own bottom line. I ran a multi-million-dollar company that was my own. I've managed multi-million-dollar organizations that was both state and public sector organizations. So let me say this much. What bothers me more than the deficit situation we have, which in my estimation is temporary, what bothers me more is the fact that we've had anywhere between $7 to $8 billion given to Flint, Michigan over the course of the last 30 years. And so where people place emphasis on the fact that there is a deficit situation, which can be resolved, and I'll tell you that how I would approach doing that. But what's more important is, how do we explain? How do you explain when well over $30 to $40 million of unspent funds were sent back to the federal government or the state governments? And so what we have here is a situation where, had we effectively developed a plan, and I call it a master plan, for the city, allow that master plan to be able to help direct us in terms of how we're going to use these dollars. And the fact that we have blight in our community could have been resolved well over 10 or 15 years ago. Had we had a plan in place, had we had effective administrations who are not so political in nature, but were community-based and cared about this community. Now, let's talk a little bit more about, had we used those dollars more effectively, would we still have a deficit situation? Possibly so, but the reasons for the deficit may not be the same. I will admit that one of the first things I would do as a mayor was to go in and reevaluate the organization and see where there's a need for realigning and restructuring. I'm the only candidate of all of the candidates that's in this race who've ever had any experience in restructuring organizations. I'm the only candidate who the state and the federal government and local government has ever collaborated with in order for me to, as part of changing and restructuring an organization, which in essence allowed them to be able to avoid, in the case of the county, a $4 million disallowance which the county would have paid had we not reached. So I'm the only one of all of the candidates who's had sole responsibility for an organization, who've managed well over $110 million, who've been responsible for restructuring organizations and realigning services, etc. So I would go in with that experience that I have, not just from Career Alliance, but even from working in banking industry, and go in and reassess. I believe that there are some opportunities that if you rethink government, if you realign certain services that are being provided, if you're open to the ideal and can think out of the box, that in the charter, it stipulates there are certain services that should be provided. The question in my mind is, the delivery system in which we use, is it the only delivery system? I say to you, no. Is it the most effective delivery system? I say to you, no. Is there a more cost-effective way for us to do it? I say to you, yes. Is there a better way in which we can engage the community in that process and offset some of our costs? I say to you, yes. But I say those things to you not because I'm assuming. I say those things to you not because I say that I'm an administrator, but I've never been responsible for turning anything around. I say that to you because I've actually been in the pits of an organization that was totally corrupted and needed to be restructured and realigned, and within a relatively short period of time, here's what was told to me by the FBI, by the U.S. Department of Labor, by the Michigan Department of Labor, by the governor of the state of Michigan. You have 2 years to take something that really got screwed up over a period of 15 years and change it. And we were able to do that. Okay? I do believe that there's some opportunities that if we take advantage of new technologies that are available, that in some kind of ways we can offset our costs and we can do things a little bit more effectively. Now, does that necessarily mean laying off a lot of people? I don't know. I don't think so. What I do think is that what it requires us to do is to go back to the table and rethink. Let me give you a typical example. We have a charter that was created in 1975.
I was just going to allude to that. Right?
That charter really, quite frankly, is outdated.
Absolutely.
Outdated for this reason. The terms in which the charter was created, the circumstances are totally different. We had a 250,000 population, now we have roughly maybe over 115,000 population. If you take a look at that situation, the ordinances that we have right now just don't apply in a lot of cases to what we have. We're one of the few towns that have as many one-way streets as any small community I've ever seen in my life. Why did it take us almost to 2007 to realize that? There's a lot of different things that we can do, but one of the things we'll have to do is take a look at the charter. See if that charter is applicative to the conditions and the circumstances and the needs that we have in our community today. I say to you, it is outdated. I will also say to you, there are some wonderful things inside of the charter that we've never exercised. The reason why we never exercise them is because the administration never placed a focus on the charter. They placed a focus on politics. And so if we were to take a look at some of the wonderful things that are inside of the charter and use those tools that are there, if we would take those tools that are outdated, reevaluate them, see if we can update them, and if we can't, throw them out. Right. So there's some wonderful opportunities that we can do.
Okay. Well, let's talk about crime. That certainly is an issue within the city. We've talked about the deficit. You don't necessarily agree that there is that much of a deficit, or you have to evaluate the situation?
I believe that we do have a deficit. The question is, can we resolve it? The answer is yes. Okay. It can be resolved.
Now, if with the lingering deficit, we know that police and fire both have had some significant cuts.
Yes.
How do you propose as mayor that you're going to make the city safer under these economic
We need to take a look at